What's up, y'all? Josh Dobbs, honored to be in Minnesota. Introduce myself to everyone.
Joshua Dobbs is having one of the most improbable seasons in the NFL. He's not going to make any All-Pro teams or even the Pro Bowl, but what Dobbs is doing right now is displaying next-level resilience. Josh Dobbs has had one of the most interesting career arcs in the NFL. A guy who was once an afterthought is now one of the most intriguing stories in the entire league. On Sunday, Josh Dobbs was thrust into action when Jaren Hall suffered a concussion in the first quarter against the Falcons. In Dobbs' first drive, he was sacked by Calais Campbell in the end zone for a safety. After that, the Vikings would slide into an 11-3 deficit. But after that first drive, Josh Dobbs completely turned things around, as he was making plays through the air and with his legs. After a back-and-forth game, things started to get real when Tyler Algier ran for a touchdown to put the Falcons up by 4 with just above 2 minutes remaining in the game. This is where the real magic happened. Down by 4 with just 2 minutes left, it was up to Josh Dobbs to lead the Vikings 75 yards down the field and score a touchdown. And Dobbs led a magnificent drive. Probably one of the most defining moments of this drive was on 4th and 7 when Josh Dobbs somehow broke out of a sack and ran for first down yardage. Then Dobbs capped off the drive by throwing what ultimately ended up being the game-winning touchdown to Brandon Powell with 22 seconds remaining. Dobbs finished the game with 224 total yards, 3 total touchdowns, and a passer rating of 101.8. And some of you might be saying, what's the big deal? We've seen backup quarterbacks come in and unexpectedly play really good all the time. Well, the big deal is that Joshua Dobbs was traded to the Vikings just 5 days before Sunday's game. He didn't get to practice with the Vikings until Wednesday, and not only that, Josh Dobbs wasn't even supposed to play in the game to begin with. So Josh Dobbs is placed in an NFL game without even knowing the playbook and not even knowing some of his teammates' names. But he goes out there and he plays with heart, and he somehow finds a way to will the Vikings to victory. And the craziest part is, this isn't even the first time that this has happened to Dobbs. In fact, the Vikings are Josh Dobbs' 5th different team in the past year. Here's the story of how Josh Dobbs went from barely being able to secure a roster spot to now being one of the best underdog stories in the entire NFL. Back in his college days, Josh Dobbs led the Tennessee Volunteers to back-to-back bowl victories in his junior and senior year. Despite that, Dobbs was not an overly impressive draft prospect, as the majority of draft analysts projected Dobbs to be drafted anywhere between the 3rd and 5th round. And these projections were pretty spot on, as in the 4th round, the Pittsburgh Steelers, who were looking for depth in their quarterback room, as Ben Roethlisberger was in the twilight years of his career, drafted Dobbs with the 135th overall pick in the 2017 NFL Draft. This was a great move for the Steelers. Drafting Dobbs was a very low-risk move with the potential that he may develop and become the team's next franchise quarterback. However, Dobbs would wind up as the 3rd-string quarterback and ultimately was traded to the Jaguars in 2019 after never starting a game for the Steelers. And not much would go on during his time in Jacksonville, as Dobbs never appeared in a game for the Jaguars and was only active for 8 games the entire year. The Jaguars decided to release Dobbs in the beginning of 2020. After that, the Steelers claimed him off of waivers, which meant that Dobbs would be heading right back to Pittsburgh, where he would be the 3rd-string quarterback again behind Mason Rudolph. Heading into 2021, Dobbs earned a 1-year extension from the Steelers, but unfortunately, Dobbs suffered a toe injury in the preseason and was placed on injured reserve and wouldn't appear in a game for the Steelers. Then in April of 2022, the Cleveland Browns signed Josh Dobbs, as they were looking for depth at the quarterback position while Deshaun Watson served a suspension. And after a very strong preseason, Dobbs earned a spot on the roster as the backup quarterback behind Jacoby Brissett while Deshaun Watson was suspended. But after Watson was reinstated from his suspension in November of 2022, Dobbs was released once again. A few weeks later, the Detroit Lions signed Josh Dobbs to their practice squad. And then just 2 weeks after joining the Lions practice squad, the Tennessee Titans signed Josh Dobbs off of the Lions practice squad and to their active roster. The Titans were desperate for a quarterback, as late in the season they had a chance to make a playoff push. However, an injury to Ryan Tannehill Tannehill meant that they would have to turn to Malik Willis, who is severely struggling in his rookie season. So after only a few weeks of being on the team, Josh Dobbs finally gets his first career start in week 17 of 2022 after 5 years in the league. Up to this point, Dobbs had only completed 10 passes in the NFL for a total of 45 yards. Given the circumstances, Dobbs actually played pretty well, but unfortunately he would go 0-2 as the starter in Tennessee, and the Titans would wind up missing the playoffs. Going into 2023, the Cleveland Browns would bring back Josh Dobbs, but then in the preseason, the Browns traded Dobbs to the Arizona Cardinals. And after only 2 weeks with the Cardinals, it was announced that Dobbs would be their week 1 starter as Kyler Murray recovered from a knee injury. Dobbs claims that he didn't even know all of his teammates' names in week 1, which means you could probably only imagine how much of the playbook he had memorized. Dobbs would start 8 games for the Cardinals and have a 1-7 record. And now, after Kirk Cousins suffered a season-ending injury, the Vikings decided to trade for Josh Dobbs. As we know, with only a few days of preparation, Dobbs was the hero of week 9 for the Minnesota Vikings. In order for Dobbs to be able to understand the plays, Kevin O'Connell would call in the play, Josh Dobbs would relay the play in the huddle, and immediately after that, Kevin O'Connell would explain to Dobbs in the headset what each player was going to do. However, sometimes Kevin O'Connell would run out of time as they would have to line up in order to get the playoffs. So in that case, Josh Dobbs would just look to his teammates and basically ask, hey man, what are you guys gonna do? It is simply unbelievable what Josh Dobbs and the Minnesota Vikings were able to pull off. But what an insane career Josh Dobbs has had up to this point. He's been on 7 different teams in 6 seasons. And as I mentioned earlier, he's been on 5 different teams in just 1 year. And on top of all of that, he earned an aerospace engineering degree at Tennessee, and he's done internships with NASA. So the guy is also a rocket scientist. And I know, Josh Dobbs is certainly not a franchise quarterback, but I do think it's fair to say that Dobbs has proven that he can be a good backup and maybe even a good bridge quarterback. I personally believe that he's put himself in the category of guys like Gardner Minshew, Jacoby Brissett, and Tyrod Taylor as one of the best backup quarterbacks in the league. And while those guys may not be considered starting quarterbacks, they certainly have a roster spot every single year. The story of Josh Dobbs is truly a great representation of a guy who kept his head down and kept working hard, and now here he is making the absolute best out of his opportunity in the NFL. Thank you guys all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to leave a like and hit that subscribe button, as it will go a long way in helping me grow this channel for you. And if you have any video ideas that you want to see on this channel, please drop it in the comments, because I want to make sure that I'm making content that you want to see. And once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.